So I want to welcome everyone today to our Kelsey Museum of Archaeology webinar entitled Local Histories, Heritage, and Resistance in a Sudanese Village. As part of an effort to overcome a long history of colonial archaeology, a University of Michigan project is working collaboratively in the village of El-Kurru in Sudan. In this talk, project director Geoff Emberling and local curator Anwar Mahajoub will discuss the development of a community heritage center as a form of resistance to colonial and nationalist heritage narratives. This webinar is being presented as part of the Fall 2023 Arts and Resistance themed semester, a partnership between the University of Michigan Museum of Art, the U of M Arts Initiative, and the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. I would like to welcome both Geoff and Anwar to our webinar today. And we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so save your questions till then.
Right, thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Anawar Mahajoub Ali. Just started studying here at the University of Michigan. First year master's student and specialization is Middle East and North African studies. So I've lived most of my life in El-Kurru, which is a small village in North Sudan. In my mind, El-Kurru is the most beautiful place ever. The village also a home to a diverse ethnic groups, but mostly Shadia. And it hosts a royal cemetery of the kingdom of Kush. So in 1918, 1919, during the Anglo-Egyptian control of Sudan, El-Kurru witnessed the first excavation. I am like me personally. I've heard lots of stories about the excavation during my childhood. Those stories formulated a negative picture, which it is about the colonialist and the way how dealt with El-Kurru resident that at that time, my ancestors. So they were worker, but they helped Reisner to dig the tombs around the cemetery, as you can see here, but they had to remain silent. So the relationship was command and silence. It just two things. Also, there was no understanding of why foreigners were coming all the way from where they lived to here, to come to this village and to dig. And taking, and take some stuff. So one of the remaining stories is the one that repeated, like, usually, was that whenever they finished digging and reached the tomb's door, they Reisner stopped them and they continue himself, or he continued with his helper, the Egyptian men. Also, there were also heavy boxes they had to carry, but they didn't know what's inside of them. So they were like wondering what is happening, why are they taking this thing, where are they taking them? Yeah.
If I could just break in, I mean, this is one of the really interesting things that's come out of our conversation about this early excavation is how long the memories of that experience of having the treasures from the site taken away have lasted, even without knowing any of the specifics. Just that feeling of the foreigners arriving, doing the digging in a kind of a secretive way, and really, I mean, we're talking about, at this point, it's over 100 years ago that Reisner was there.
Yeah. Let's say it's over 100 years, but it's my grandfather worked with them, my mother father. So yeah, it's like I mean, it's a little bit far, but in the mind of my my family, and so it's remained, because we share it. My mother shared it, and then I'll share it, and then someone else. So yeah, it kind of deeply affected us. And so after 1919, the site remained quiet place that attracted tourists every once in a while because of the remaining colored tombs. So they are still like well preserved with all the colors and the hieroglyphs, and this is something like kind of attractive about the site. The local community also maintain a connection with the site. There will be occasionally visits organized to the site in like national holidays and New Year vacation and so on. Yeah, and so this rich part of history of the Kingdom Kush remained kind of out of the primary education, and the government just totally neglected like any information about this in the curriculum. There was also no presence of site management, except for one guard whose job was just to open the door for tourists. So in 2013, the second encounter in my village with archaeological excavation, a project that included the University of Michigan and the University of Copenhagen and the University of Dungal also. It's the International El-Kurru project, was interesting. It was an interesting time because again, those concerns like raised again by the community. Something like, what is happening? Why did they come again to dig? They already took everything. So are we going to remain silent again? While we carry heavy boxes? So yeah, I was actually annoyed because I was one of the people there, but I was also trying to understand exactly what is happening. I remember my first conversation was a member of the team. He showed kind of willingness to talk and explain what type of work he was doing, and I remember he was working with his total station device. So yeah. So the University of Michigan team kind of, as well as the government official, actually, they showed kind of interesting consideration of local community questions and concerns. In my opinion, if they hadn't done so, things might have gone in a different direction. So in 2014, the team became part of the village. They lived in a house. They formed friendships with the community. Of course, unlike Bryce and her team, which stayed far away, kind of alienated himself. So almost everyone in Kuru worked in the excavation and from the surrounding villages, because there was a good chance for everyone to have a job there. The beginning, the excavation was huge, and we worked like there was two, almost sometimes three sites, like more than 100 something. So people were allowed to see the findings, and it's kind of comforting fact to see the findings and to know where they will eventually end up. And we were told, and that is true, that they will end up in the National Museum, and they're not going to be taken. So that's kind of a relief for everyone, that what will be found here during this excavation, it will remain and stay in the country. And one of the interesting thing is that whenever there is a finding, or even human remain like bodies and so on, almost everyone, you go outside, everyone is chatting, they're sharing the news, they found this, so they know. And this is kind of exciting part, whether it's spot, whether there is a drawing on a bot or not, it's like decorated, and whether it's like a metal, iron, so on. Also, in more informative effort, the University of Michigan also provided the community with public lectures and movies about the excavation. I remember this night where they projected this movie, Rise of the Black Pharaohs, and that was something kind of almost yeah, it's interesting to see your own village in a movie.
So this is a National Geographic documentary that was filmed in 2014, and then the next year we came back and showed it, and it had a lot of the people in the village, you know, in the scenes as workers and so on. And so even though when we were showing it, it was in English, and most people in the village couldn't really understand what was being said, it was super exciting to see them see themselves. I mean, it's understandable to see themselves on the screen.
Yeah. It was, I think it's more than they just saw themselves in the movie. It's like you aligning yourself with the kings and queens and kind of trying to discover their own heritage. So yeah, there is a kind of another level of connection. I mean, as I think. So also one creative artistic incident which I saw for the first time, talents in my village, was the photo competition. Because yeah, so this was a competition where everyone could gather 5 to 10 photos and share them, and then there will be a winner. And I was so surprised by like the diversity of perception of like what represents heritage, and how do people see their own heritage and what is beautiful to them. Yeah.
So Anwar, let's come back to that point when we talk a little more about the Heritage Center.
Sure.
Are you ready for me to start talking? I can hardly restrain myself any longer.
Sure, go on.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Geoff Emberling. I've been the director of the University of Michigan project at El-Kurru for the last 10 years or so, since it started, and I'm very happy to be doing this kind of experimental talk with Anwar. We've never really done a free form talk like this before, and we haven't really planned it out in a lot of detail. So I hope the conversational format works well for you rather than the usual illustrated slide lecture. First of all, I want to say what a great pleasure it is to be working with Anwar. Anwar started working with us, as he said, at the very beginning of the project, and English language education is not a standard part of Sudanese school curricula these days, but Anwar has managed to learn English, you know, more or less by himself and through online resources, and then through working with us over the last 10 years, that here he is just giving an off-the-cuff talk in English. So I'm very impressed with that. I was recently filmed in El-Kurru doing an off-the-cuff lecture in Arabic. It was not so great, let me just say. Anyway, the school children were polite as they listened to me talk about it. So that issue of language, I'm bringing it up not just, I'm bringing it up for a reason, which is that part of what we're going to be talking about today is colonialism and its legacies and resistance to those legacies, because of course archaeology is a colonial discipline, and particularly in a place like Sudan, which actually literally was colonized by foreign powers, several foreign powers. the legacy is very real. And one part of that legacy is the way in which English is the standard language of foreign archaeological projects wherever they come from in Sudan. It's the common language that we all speak rather than Arabic. So that's definitely a holdover, and it means that anyone like Anwar or any of my other Sudanese friends and colleagues who want to participate in archaeology have to do so in a language that they're mostly not formally instructed in, and so that's a challenge, and it's just a testament to Anwar that he's able to do this so comfortably. So we wanted to give this talk in the series on arts and resistance. Our new associate director at the Kelsey, Jennifer Kirker, suggested this to me, and I was intrigued by the idea that this effort to move toward a post-colonial archaeology was in fact a kind of resistance, and it is a resistance on multiple levels. It's a resistance to standard archaeological practice. It's a resistance within Sudan to national narratives of archaeology and heritage, and to national ownership of archaeology and heritage, and in fact also to ownership by the international community, because El-Kurru is part of one of the 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Sudan, and so UNESCO also plays a role. I think we'll get around to talking about that later. So to start with, then, I wanted to talk about these 3 different areas of resistance that we wanted to focus on. One of them is colonialism. Another one is national politics and identity. And then a third one is community identity. And so we'll try to get to that by the time we're done, and hope to have some time for questions at the end. So let's talk first about colonialism. So Anwar, now that you're here at Michigan and you're listening to archaeology talks, and you're taking my class on decolonizing archaeology, you're hearing a lot about decolonization. So yeah, tell us about what people think about colonialism in El-Kurru.
They don't think anything. No, I think so what they think about colonialism is as it was as the way of you just do things, and you excavate, and you don't get a chance to talk and to ask questions, and basically, yeah, you just there to obey orders. That's the basic understanding of colonialism.
But there's not like an active conversation that's going on about decolonization. I mean, I've never heard anybody say that word in Arabic or in English when I've been in Sudan.
No, not at all.
Right.
No one talks about it.
So it's an interesting phenomenon in the sense that here I am as a representative of a former colonizing power, and I'm the one who is talking about decolonization, when it's not. This is not a wish that's coming from the community, except or at least not labeled in that way.
I think because you know more about colonialism, and because you understand the extended effect of colonialism. Basically, everyone in the country, they think that colonialism is just something that is gone now, and now we are free, independent country, and so on, and all the effects just gone with the colonialists, but that is not necessarily true.
Right. Let me so let me talk a little bit about that here. I'll go back to some of those other slides. So as Anwar said, we kind of started this engagement with the community around archaeological issues by showing this film and having a discussion with people in the village about what parts of the heritage of El-Kurru, which, as Anwar said, was a royal cemetery for kings and queens of ancient Kush. The conversation was partly they were interested to know what had happened to the bones of the kings. That was at the top of their mind. And as it turned out, all of those tombs had been disturbed in antiquity, and there were very few, if any, human remains brought back from the site that were from the original burials. And so in the course of this conversation, though, it became clear that the people in the village were not clear about the objects that Reisner had taken in those sealed wooden boxes, most of which went back to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And we'd like to make the point that because George Reisner worked on for the Museum of Fine Arts for a period of 15 years in Sudan, more or less, he excavated all the royal tombs that he could find. And because of the division of finds that was in place at the time, roughly half of the material went back to Boston, where it is currently. So it's among the very best collections of antiquities from Sudan in the world, and it is not on display. It's just in storage right now. So that is a part of this piece of colonialism, that is the ownership of the objects. So so in those conversations, we made it clear that there were all of these objects that were missing from the site and that local people didn't know anything about. And so as a response to that, we'll be talking in a little bit about the Community Heritage Center that we're working on. One component of that is a notebook of objects that have been excavated from El-Kurru and that are today completely missing from local knowledge and imagination about what the site once contained. And so, I mean, we just closed an exhibit here on campus that was partially about this El-Kurru project, and we had this little notebook of finds there. It was a small part of the overall exhibit. But I mean, I think this has a very big potential to be part of a resistance to colonialism, because it's the first chance that people in the village are going to get. Obviously, it will be an Arabic language version of this notebook. It'll be the first chance for people in the village to see and learn about those actual objects, which have so far not been a part of their awareness. So Anwar, we haven't actually ever talked about what you think the likely response to this is going to be.
I think people will be thrilled. There will be different, of course, point of view, maybe, but it's amazing for them to just see and understand that all of this was here. I think it will change the perspective of how they look at the site, because for a long time it's been repeated that they just, even in Botry, they took everything and left us nothing but stone. But when they see what was actually here, I think this is going to be, it's going to be change, I guess. At least they know that they are there. They exist somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, I think this is a potentially powerful part of this exhibit. So let's talk a little more about this Community Heritage Center. So this is a direct outgrowth, step by step, of that showing that film that you mentioned. That was the beginning of a whole series of conversations with people in the village about how much they knew about the site, how much they wanted to know about the site, what the nature of their interaction with visitors to the site was. Did they want to have more interaction and potentially more benefit from having visitors come to the site? And for me, a turning point in all those conversations was when it became clear that we could set something up where people in the village could cook for visitors. Like that idea that you could serve local food, fits very nicely into a Sudanese notion of hospitality. And so that's really what launched us on this fairly long road to identifying a suitable house in the village and to doing this renovation project, which we've been working on over the last couple of years. This is a slide that Anwar took from on top of the roof of one of the guard room, and you can see that at the end of the season, at the beginning of this year, we had not finished. We maybe should have started this talk by foregrounding the fact that there is a civil war going on in Sudan right now, and that has caused a large displacement of population within Sudan, and also forced people to flee to neighboring countries, and it's devastating, really. The fighting has been focusing the capital city of Khartoum, and also in the western region of Darfur, but not limited to those places. And so far, for the most part, the area up in northern Sudan where El-Kurru is located has been spared the direct impact of the fighting, but it means that we foreign members of the team can't return to Sudan to finish this renovation project. And so right now we're working on ways to keep the educational programs that we've developed going. And here is the most finished part of the building. We made sure that the area where we could host local school groups to the site, in order to have them learn about archaeology and learn about the site, and engage with questions around their own heritage. And so those visits have continued through the time of the war. This photo was taken after the war started. And are set to continue as long as is possible, because one of the challenges for Sudanese right now is trying to find a way to feel like life can be normal, and that's just for the local people. So El-Kurru and every other place that's outside the area of fighting is also full of internally displaced people. So there are 2 or 3 times the normal number of people living in these houses. And of course, the refugees don't have, they don't have jobs. They, for the most part, they don't have things to do during the day. And so we have, an opportunity to contribute in a small way to this problem by allowing people to learn more about El-Kurru. So anyway, this center is where that notebook of finds will be displayed. It's also a way to resist national notions of heritage in a couple of different ways. So one of them, this is a little bit of a complicated story, and I'm going to make Anwar tell it. He offered to tell it before. That involves some competition that developed around who was actually going to build this heritage center. So do you want to tell that story, Anwar?
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear how you tell it.
So we've been working since 2016 on accomplishing the Heritage Center, and at the same time the project was kind of joined at the beginning with the University of Dongola, but then it's kind of got separated, and we got this idea of building the Heritage Center. We chose another place other than this to build one from scratch, but it didn't work because of financial issues. But then at the same time, the team from the University of Dongola, led by Professor Abbas Sid Ahmed, they also tried to make another heritage center with the help of a businessman who also closely related to the government, to the Bashir government, and he wanted to build this center as parallel to the center that we want to build. And our main goal from the center is like to support the village, to exhibit our own heritage and share it with tourists and so on. But his main goal was, it's a business. He's a businessman, so it was like a business. So with the help of Abbas, he was trying to construct another heritage center, and he started lots of material there. Like he started planning to build one directly in front of it's actually inside the archaeological site itself. And so the NCOM, which is the National Antiquities, they tried to stop him because this is disturbing the site, and UNESCO also tried, but it just didn't matter. So he, because of his close relation with the dictator regime, so he contacted the residential palace. So he got like a permission from there. So it's the highest form of the government to continue building his heritage center. But lucky us, because of the 20, we tried also to resist. So I remember me and group of people, we went and both, like, we also wanted to, if he can build here, we also can build. It's not like but it was forbidden from the government to build around the center, around the archaeological site, because it's going to be disturbing. So yeah, so we tried. We also said, okay, if you can build, we also can build. We're not moving from here. But then the revolution happened in 2018.
Can I just clarify that point? So
yeah.
So the local community recognized, because they know this man and this type of person who's closely connected with the government was not building this center in a collaborative way, and they were not building it in a way that was designed to benefit the local community. That was a big part of this. And so he started building, and as an act of resistance and protest, it was overnight, one night, a bunch of people from El-Kurru village went out and they made little piles of stones, which is a traditional way of marking out property where you're planning to build. So the entire plateau where the archaeological site is, suddenly overnight had all of these piles of stone, which was this community's symbolic protest. And of course, they timed this right for when an inspection visit from UNESCO was arriving at the site. So UNESCO arrived, they saw the beginnings of this, large scale construction project, and they also saw all of these piles of stone. And they said, wait a second, what's going on here? And that, as Anwar said, led to these protests and also ultimately to the override from the presidential palace. So that was devastating. And then Anwar, maybe you can finish that story.
Yeah, I mean, let's say nothing happened after that. It's still the remaining of his material, like around the site, and but then after the revolution, he and group of people who belonged to the government, they just caught them and throw them in the jail, and that was kind of on our side.
Right. Yeah, that was a dramatic story. So anyway, so that then gets back to this question of kind of local heritage versus national heritage. And it became clear to us very early on that if this heritage center was going to be owned by the government, that none of the benefits would stay in the local community. And that's just the way the Sudanese government is set up. You know, tickets are sold to archaeological sites and the money doesn't go to the antiquities department so that they can protect site. It goes to the finance ministry. And so and it never comes back. So anyway, it's very important for us to set this up from the very beginning as what's called a voluntary organization. It's kind of the equivalent of a nonprofit organization here. So it's a community village-based organization that is the owner technically of this heritage center, and it was also very important to us to identify a local curator who would be the one who was primarily responsible for the intellectual content in the center, and that is Anwar. And so that intellectual content is what we've developed over the last 3 years or so with support, as I'm noting on this slide, with support from the University of Michigan Humanities Collaboratory, which has very generously supported a group of us working together to develop educational materials, training materials for teachers, and that's what supports these visits. The teachers asked us to write a book for children about the site, which we have done in a collaborative way. It's turned into an interesting story called Leaving Our Mark, that talks about children observing ancient graffiti on the monuments and wondering why would anyone care if they wrote their own name on the stone blocks of the pyramid, for example. So it's a little more thought-provoking than the usual children's book about archaeology. We've also developed exhibits, archaeological exhibit, and this exhibit of local culture that features the photos from the photo contest that Anwar was mentioning. And so all of this really is an attempt to put the ownership and the benefits from this heritage center into the local community. And so that's very much a form of, nonviolent resistance to national narratives. I think I want to leave time for any questions that people might have. So Anwar, I don't know if you have other things that you wanted to say.
I think another form of resistance is the kind of work that you and the team and me have been doing also, like all of us, because you could have just stopped after the first time there was an issue in Sudan, and coming back and trying to find funds and material also for preservation or for construction, or this is kind of a resistance also, because you have this goal of accomplishing the center or other stuff, and you just continue. So appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, this decolonization is it's a big buzzword, but I have to say that this kind of work where we're working closely with the community is so richly rewarding on all kinds of levels, from just personal connections, but also to an enriched understanding of the site and its environment and the landscape. It's really beneficial to everybody. So we've been very pleased to do that. So I think with that, Stephanie, I think we'll stop talking, and I don't know if anyone will have questions, but I wanted to be sure to leave time for that.
Absolutely. So this is the question and answer portion of the session. I want to just thank Geoff and Anwar so much for the talk here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature. And my colleague, Kathy Person, will help manage that.
All right, well, while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, we can talk a little more about one issue that might be of interest, which is the terminology. So it's very often the case among foreigners to refer to this whole area as Nubia. And in Sudan, within Sudan, Nubia means something quite different. And I wondered, Anwar, if you could talk about whereas the ancient culture called itself Kush, that was the term that they used. So Anwar, could you talk a little bit about Nubia in a Sudanese context?
Yeah. So there is this Nuba, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Who are the Nuba?
The Nuba are different ethnic groups, lives in different places.
In
But
Sudan.
Nubia, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and so you get, for example, we are like, I mean, me and my ethnic group are kind of considered Arab, but then we are Nubian also. So you know, that extent to include Dongula, which is the Nagala, and then Halfa, and then Mahas, all of those people are Nubian. And then you go until Aswan.
So those are people who speak Nubian languages.
They speak, yes.
As you go north from along the river from El-Kurru.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I believe at one time back in history, we also spoke sort of Nubian language, but it disappeared. And now, but you still can see so many words, you know, still we use, they are not Arabic words. And the name of some, like a lots of villages also along the Nile, if you go back up, if you go upstream, then a lots of villages are named on Nubian names. And yeah, so
it's a complex history.
Yeah, there is definitely this root of being Nubian, speaking you know, Arabic, but I think they call it urbanized Nubian, something like that.
Arabized, yeah.
Arabized, yeah. So we are both, and you can't just say one and leave the other. So yeah, I think finding a way to integrate this and to accept it as essential part of our identity is something important.
Okay.
We just have a question in the Q&A. How was this issue talked about before the conversation began around, quote, decolonization? In other words, what did action or dialogue look like before this project began?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to my own experience leading archaeological projects before this one, or even right at the beginning of this project, before we had started to really talk with people in the community, which is that, you know, as an archaeologist, you design your own research, and that research is, you know, it's partly your own curiosity, and it's partly also, you know, to benefit your own career. That's what scholars do. And really you didn't think about the local community's potential engagement or interests at all. You know, nothing. The whole thing was meant to feed back into a Euro-American, wherever you're from, back into the intellectual academic environment of your home. And so, you know, I mean, you arrive and you hope that you can be, you know, have friendly relations with the people in the village, but otherwise just no engagement. Like, to give an example, at this point, I know a lot about the modern history of Sudan. But if I think about my previous project was in Syria. And I managed to get through, I mean, I dug at that site for 12 years. I managed to get through that whole period of time knowing almost nothing about modern Syria, because in the academic vision of things, it was just not relevant. That is the old colonial mode of archaeology, where the needs and interests and really the lives of the local people that you're coming to stay with and work with are just not, they are not valued, and they're not of interest. I mean, I'm putting it in a stark way, but fundamentally that's the old way that archaeology has been practiced.
So by working in Sudan, you also decolonizing your perceptions?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, you know, I've thought a lot about why, you know, how I personally went from just working in that old mode to being open and interested in whatever. And there's a lot of different reasons for it, but definitely a big part of it was the El-Kurru community being welcoming and interested and open to having these kind of conversations in a way that you know I hadn't experienced before. So yeah, I mean, of course, I've learned a lot from being in Sudan. So among many other things, Sudanese are great at being friends, and so like I've learned a lot about being a better friend just from spending time in Sudan.
Thank you on the behalf of every Sudanese.
We have a question from Jennifer. Thank you so much for a great talk. It was great to see how archaeologists can work collaboratively with communities and build pride in local heritage. Anwar, I wonder if you can speak to your vision for the Heritage Center and what you hope it will be in 5 to 10 years.
That's interesting. I hope it will be as bland and even more. So like during the, you know, my years that I lived my whole life there are some times where we really need support, like for sudden occasion, like for emergencies, and you need like financial support now, or and then that's one idea of what the center could be operating and doing. At the same time, also because me myself, I didn't get the chance to learn in the school about the kings and queens of this ancient Kush kingdom. I'm hoping that kids that, you know, that they are in my place, the same place that I came from, they would grow up knowing and understanding their culture better. And I hope that it's also would, you know, inform the public, the tourists also about our own heritage, not just that far history. I mean, it's not like super far from us, but it's also kind of different for them also to learn about, you know, our lifestyle and how do we live. What are some like good traits that we have. I grow up in a community where they teach you to be generous, and that's a common thing everywhere. So I want people also to know that about my village and how people act. So yeah, that's what I hope. That's what I see.
And of course, if I could just say, it is heartbreaking that we really, I mean, we had all this momentum going, and we're going to find ways to do what we can in the current situation, but with a civil war, you know, raging and no end in sight, it does make you wonder about how much of a long-term plan we can make right at this moment. So sorry, Kathy.
Oh, no problem. So Aaron, who asked the first question, says, to clarify, I was hoping to hear more about how this local community perceived the project. Thanks for the opposing perspective as well. And Julia has asked, says, thank you for an interesting discussion. I would be curious to know a little bit more about how the perception of the local community of their own past has changed since Geoff's work started. In what terms would you describe the relationship between the people in the present and those in the past? We have another comment in there as well, but those seem to be related, so I thought I would ask them at the same time.
So Anwar, why don't you answer that first question about how the local community has perceived our project? I mean, we talked about the Reisner, and you talked about how we were welcomed in the community, but now, 10 years later.
Let's say it's definitely different. Like perception change, people are easily like they can get easy access to information that that they want to know about. They could just ask or buy the event that we organized in the clubs. And so I think at the beginning, so I know this because I listened to the conversation that are happening at the beginning of the project. It was the same concern, like what is happening, why are they coming, and so on. And myself also had those concerns, but then with the conversation, especially the government official. So for a long time we didn't interact with the government official, like the antiquity service. But since the project started and until now, almost everyone knows them. There's been 3 directors, I think Murtada and Mahmoud and Sami. Everybody knows them. They can talk to them. And I think everyone who has a concern would just go and ask. I think for now it's totally different. You don't get to hear the same stories that have been going on for a long time, or Reisner excavation and how he built his tent away, and then how nobody can go and ask, and so yeah, I think now changed.
So let me just try. Thank you, Anwar. Let me just try to answer Julia's question, and then maybe you might have a word or two to add. But we're almost out of time here. But this is about the perception of the local community of their own past and how it's changed since our project has arrived. So, I mean, this could be a long answer, but very, very briefly, the Shaigia, who are the main ethnic group there, think of themselves as Muslims and Arabs. And so their own heritage narrative before we arrived really didn't go to ancient Kush, these pyramids that were in their backyards, but went to the Arabian Peninsula. Or at least that was one of the strains. And so when we arrived, I was kind of struck by what seemed like, not that much interest in the archaeology of this site. Clearly there was more richness to that knowledge than I understood. But I was also I really didn't want to impose on the local community my idea of how they should think about their heritage. I wasn't going to tell them, this is your heritage, you have to protect it. That's a standard thing that archaeologists do. And it's kind of a way of getting the local community to do our work for us in a way that we want. And I really didn't want to do that. So I was very careful about not saying anything, but I think inevitably the fact that we were there valuing and paying attention to the antiquities, clearly, having made all this effort to come and so on, I think that engaged more interest in the past. And then we had a moment while we were filming this National Geographic documentary where an older man in the village named Mansour was being filmed as he was digging, and the Egyptian cameraman asked him, so what do you think about these pyramids? And he said something like, we we didn't recognize them as our fathers for a long time, but now we're starting to get to know them, and we wish we had known them for a long time before. So it was a beautiful answer. And I think, you know, even without me lecturing anybody or any of the team lecturing anybody, just the fact that we were there valuing the remains changed, you know, started to change some local perceptions. So Anwar, do you want to have the last word on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is true, because I just remembered one time when you remember we were trying to make a roof for the temple, and we bought all this metal, and it's like, it's crazy money was. So when they ask how much is this metal, and then you know, we told them the number, it was like a shock to them, and just why are you doing that? You could just give it to me. It's so I think from that moment they understood that this is even much more valuable than this. I mean, this is for the basic understanding of just normal, not necessarily highly educated person in Kurru. But yeah, I think there is more attention now to the site since it's cleaned and taken care of. And yeah.
Okay, so I think we should stop there in the interest of time. Thank you, Anwar. Thank you everyone for attending, and I'll turn it over to Stephanie for any last comment.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you both, Geoff and Anwar, for today's talk. And thank you to our audience. And you can check back on our website for further webinars and flash talks, as well as in-person events. Thank you so much.
Ma salama.